Hello, my name is Stan West, and this is a pre-recorded presentation for the 2021 meeting of the Society for Mathematical Psychology. Today, I will be presenting a virtual talk entitled Network Analysis of Emerging Vocabularies Reveals Different Developmental Trajectories in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. I will start out by introducing you to some of the behavioral and communication difficulties that individuals with autism encounter. Broadly, ASD is characterized by restrictive and repetitive behaviors, as well as social communication difficulties. Although these communication deficits occur in language production and comprehension, comprehending language is especially difficult for this population. To better understand language deficits in autism, recent literature has been investigating semantics, or the comprehension of word meaning, as a contributing factor. Such literature includes Nigels and Tech, who found that although some children with ASD may seem to have well-formed syntactical language that is used appropriately in context, they may not know what the individual words mean, thus inhibiting them from utilizing those words in novel sentences and contexts. Evidence of this is provided by Perkins and colleagues, who transcribed conversations between themselves and participants with ASD, and found that they could use the words correctly in sentences, but then asked what the words meant. For example, there was one participant who used the word silence 3 times in an utterance, but then asked what silence means. Before I go any further, it's worth mentioning that our semantic environment plays an important role in how we acquire and use language. The semantic environment is the words that we are exposed to and the information about the words that give them meaning. And this information can include how they're used in different contexts, how they're used together, and how frequently they are used. We know that the semantic environment is important for early language acquisition because language becomes more repetitive and less variable across contexts when it is directed towards a child. Now the question is, how can we study the semantic environment in the context of developing vocabularies? Network approaches have been successful in achieving this aim in typically developing individuals. And research in this area has come to the general conclusion that the semantic environment plays an important role in vocabulary development in typically developing children. Evidence of this is provided by Hills and colleagues, who found that the relationships between words in the semantic environment predict the order of word acquisition, such that the most semantically related words are learned first. This network contains the vocabulary of a child, and the relationships between the words are provided by the semantic environment. And according to Hills and colleagues, words like car, horse, dog would all be acquired relatively early because they're the most connected in the network. This network approach has also been extended to the study of disordered language in late talkers. Late talkers are children who have an atypical rate of language production without any developmental disorder diagnoses. And what Beckett and colleagues found was that late talkers have a different vocabulary network when compared to typical talkers. And this led them to conclude that the late talkers use an oddball strategy when sampling words from the semantic environment, where novel words relative to words they already know are preferentially acquired. And so due to the success of the semantic network analysis approach in typical and late talking populations, we utilized a similar method to ask the question, do the early vocabulary structures of children with autism indicate a different relationship with their semantic environment than do typically developing children? To obtain our vocabulary data, we use the Communicative Development Inventory, which is a well-established parent report instrument for assessing the development of early vocabulary. This information is contained in Word Bank for typically developing children and INDAR for children with autism. So before running our analyses, we filtered these data sets down based on the following criteria. For Word Bank, we started with almost 8,000 individuals and filtered out the late talkers who have an atypical rate of language production without a developmental disorder diagnoses. And we did this based off of vocabulary size of this sample with respect to the typical vocabulary of kids the same age. We also filtered out people who knew less than 20 and more than 600 words, those without gender information, and also to satisfy a male-female ratio that is equal to our ASD group. We ended up with 1,096 individuals, with 837 being male, the average age of around 20 months, and the mean words produced at around 280. As for our ASD group, we started with just under 15,000 individuals and filtered out kids based on a non-ASD diagnosis, missing data, and the same vocabulary cutoffs as in the TD group. And for our analysis, we had 203 individuals with ASD, with 155 being male, the mean age of 50 months, and the mean words produced at around 260. In addition to the CDI, we used word association data to indicate the semantic relationship between words on the CDI. And word associations are a robust measure of semantic relatedness and are collected using a simple cue-response paradigm, where participants are presented with a cue and prompted to record the first 3 words that come to mind. For this study, we used a modified word association task where the participants were instructed to respond as if they were talking to a child. And this was done to better estimate the semantic environment of the children in the study. So we can bring the vocabulary and word association data together by representing them as networks. The 2 main components that make up a semantic network are nodes and edges, where nodes represents the words and edges will represent the semantic relationship between words. And so just to reiterate, the nodes are added to a network based on a child's known vocabulary via the CDI, and edges are added between nodes that are semantically related based on word association norms. The advantage of using networks to analyze language is that it allows us to measure how vocabulary is structured. And semantic network structure can be measured in terms of small-worldness. And small world structure is not exclusive to just vocabularies and can be seen in many things such as airline flight patterns. And as you can see in this map, this particular airline shows a lot of small world structure in that any 2 airports are within 1 or 2 stops from one another. Similar structure can be seen in vocabularies, where the closeness of words in terms of the number of jumps between any 2 nodes determines the degree of small worldness. And as you can see in this network, all the nodes are connected to at least 1 other node, and they are highly clustered within hubs, and the distance between nodes is quite small. We measured the distance, we measured small worldness for each child's vocabulary by computing statistics that relate to these properties, which are the in degree, the clustering coefficient, and the distance. And behaviorally speaking, a high degree of small worldness supports language processing and comprehension. Before I get into what a random network is, it's important to understand why we use them. The following graphs will represent the analysis of one of the statistics mentioned in the previous slide, in degree. As you can see from our raw statistic, there's a strong relationship between in degree and vocabulary size, with vocabulary size being on the x-axis and the statistic being on the y-axis. Also, each point in the figure is projected onto the x and y axes as a one-dimensional rug plot. To account for this vocabulary size effect, as well as noun bias, which is an inclination to acquire more nouns than verbs and is found commonly in developing vocabularies, we drew a pseudo-random subnetwork from the full network of associations for each individual. And this reflected the vocabulary size and the noun-verb composition of each participant. And the connections between the words via word association norms were retained. So let's say we have this network simulating a full network of all the words on the CDI, and the child has a vocabulary of 4. We are going to sample 4 random nodes with the same ratio of nouns and verbs as the child's network and compute the statistics for that network. And by repeating this process hundreds of times for each child in our sample, we can create a baseline that can then be subtracted out of the raw data. These are the random network statistics, and as you can see, there's an almost linear relationship with vocabulary size, which represents our null distribution that any effects are due to vocabulary size. However, after we normalize this out, we see that there is still an effect indicating that there are other dynamics, such as sampling strategies, that are contributing to our results. And this is how we obtain z-scores for the rest of our analyses. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we computed z-scores for each individual's network statistics using the vocabulary size and composition standardized random acquisition networks to normalize. We use these scores to run an orthogonal polynomial regression where we built a model based on linear, quadratic, and cubic trends in the data. This allowed us to measure group effects as well as differences in the group's trajectories over vocabulary size for each statistic. Okay, so now we're going to walk through some of the results. And just as a reminder, in these graphs, we were reporting trends in the z-scores that were normalized using random acquisition networks that were standardized to each individual's vocabulary size and noun-verb composition. And so for n-degree, we can see that the n-degree's trajectory is the same for both groups, although the ASD group tends to have a larger n-degree. For clustering coefficient, the ASD group has a more linear and cubic trajectory than the TD group. And this indicates that the ASD group is becoming clustered earlier than TD kids and are maintaining their clustering relative to the random acquisition networks later in their vocabulary acquisition. For distance, the ASD kids have a more linear and quadratic trajectory than the TD kids. And keep in mind, in this plot, a smaller distance indicates a more small world structure. The steeper linear trend in the ASD group indicates that the distance between nodes gets smaller quicker in the vocabularies of kids with ASD. All in all, the results indicate that children with ASD are sensitive to the semantic environment as they develop. And this confirms prior work that reports that children with ASD do engage in statistical learning. And in fact, their vocabularies are more clustered and dense than a typically developing child, as we found in our study. So why are we seeing this high clustering and low distance in kids with ASD? Well, one reason could be because of a major feature of ASD, which is restricted interests. And these kids could be exposed to and attend to words on the CDI that pertain to their domain of interests. And because words within this domain are more likely to be semantically related, they would be more clustered and have less distance between them. So I wanted to give a thank you to my co-investigators, Dr. Chris Cox and Dr. Eileen Habig, and also my research assistant, Hannah Taylor, as well as the National Database for Autism Research for providing us with our sample. Thank you.